Hello, my dear students. Hope you're fine and safe. Today, we will discuss a new chapter, India's freedom struggle, the first phase. We have already discussed in the previous chapter about the Great Uprising, the battle. We have already discussed the Great Uprising. Today, we will start a new chapter. From the chapter, we will discuss about the objectives or demands and methods of struggle of the early nationalists and any two contributions or the contributions of Dadabhai Nauroji and Surendranath Banerjee and Gopalakrishna Gokhale we will discuss in this chapter. Okay, also we will discuss some of the major points about the Surat split of 1907 and about the Bengal or the partition of Bengal of 1905. Also, we will discuss the important points, the early nationalist phase and the assertive nationalist phase. The history of the Indian national movement can be divided into three phases: 1885 to 1907, the early nationalist phase, and 1907 to 1916, it's the assertive phase, and 1915 to 1947, it's the Gandhian era. We can divide into three parts. The early nationalist. What is early nationalist? Congress was led by the group of leaders called the early nationalist in its initial years. The early nationalists were the group leaders called the early nationalist in the initial years. It means the first years the early nationalist groups were non-like. Okay, and in that the partition, most of them were educated and middle class, like lawyers, teachers, doctors, and etc. Okay, and in the early nationalist phase, they had the government asking for freedom of speech and expression, expansion of welfare programs, promotion of education, and the early nationalists include the leaders like W.C. Banerjee, Rashbhai Ghosh, Surendranath Banerjee, Dadabhai Nauroji, Gopal Krishna Gokhale, and Madam Mohan Malviya, etc. were the people involved. And the beliefs of the early nationalists we can discuss. They had faith in justice, fair play, and honesty of the British. And the British were favorably inclined towards or cancelled towards the Congress during in the early years of its formation, and they hoped that British would grant home rule to them, and they believed the British rule had many beliefs, like it helped in the eradicating sati, child marriage, and untouchability from the society. And the British, or they opined that British would help Indians to govern themselves according to Western standards. They opined that British would help Indians to govern themselves according to Western standards. And they said that the main obstacle in India's progress is not the British rule but the social and economic backwardness of India. Also, the early nationalists told that the main problem of India's progress is not the British rule but the social and economic backwards of the Indians. It was said by the early nationalist people. Okay, to overcome from the backwardness, those are the main problem. What? Social and economic problems, not the Britishers. And they preferred patience and on violence and used peaceful methods to achieve their aims. They preferred, who? The early nationalists used what? The violence on violence and used peaceful methods. Okay, the demands of the early nationalist. What are the demands of the early nationalist? We can check what are the demands they produced. Okay, and the first one is constitutional freedom. The early nationalists wanted a large share in the government of their country. The first demand was that the early nationalists wanted a larger share in the government of their country. And the second point, They did not ask for immediate achievement of their goal and aimed at winning freedom through a gradual progress. So they do not want immediate achievement of their goal. They just wanted to get the goal after winning freedom through a gradual process, slow process they want, and they want to win. The demands made by them are as follows. Many demands were there produced by the early nationalist phase. The first one is abolition of Indian Council. They just wanted to stop. Okay, they just wanted to stop the abolition of Indian Council. And the second one, expansion of Legislative Council and Legislative Assembly. They wanted to expand, they want to improve more people in the Legislative Assembly and Legislative Council, and increase Indian membership in the various councils, and raise the slogans no taxation without representation. They just announced, the people of early nationalist phase announced that no taxation, they will not give the taxation without representing them a member from the early nationalist into the parliament or to the central. Demanded Swarajya within British Empire and Indian representation in executive council of the viceroy. They just wanted the Indian representative in the viceroy, as a viceroy. Now moving to the economic reforms. What are the economic reforms the early nationalist phase demanded? Reduction in land revenue and protection of peasants against unjust demands of zamindars. They just wanted to reduce the land revenue. Britishers were asking more land revenue. They just wanted, the early nationalist phase wanted to reduce the land revenue, land income. Demanded to spend money on welfare activities like health, education by reducing money spent on army. All the Britishers were spending the army on Britishers army only, spending the money on. But the early nationalist phase, they demanded to spend the money in the health, education, okay, and inquiry into India's growing property. And also they just inquired the India's growing property, told the Britishers availability of cheap credit for presents through agriculture banks, development of banks, irrigation and medical facilities, to impose heavy tax on imported goods and grant loan for the development of coal, paper and sugar and industries. Okay, so they just wanted to impose the heavy tax, on imported goods and grant loan for the development of coal, paper and sugar industries. Total abolition of salt tax and duty on sugar. They just wanted to abolish, stop the tax on the salt and improve the tax of sugar. And third one, the administrative demands. What all the demands they brought in the administrative level? That's nationalist phase or early nationalist phase. What they brought in the administrative level: demanded for simultaneous Indian civil service exam in England and India, compete or complete the separation of the executive and judiciary to protect Indians from the arbitrary arts of police. So they just demanded the people should be elected, or the exam should be conducted from India, also from England. And the cancellation of Arms Act and License Act. They just wanted to cancel the Arms Act and License Act. Employment of Indians at higher administrative services. Employment of Indians at higher administrative services. Spread of primary education among masses. Also they just demanded for all the people of India, those who are educated, wanted to get the high position. And improvement in police system to make it honest and efficient. There should be a honest judiciary there, okay, towards the people of British and in India. And fourth, defense of civil rights. What are the defense of civil rights the early nationalist phase bring up towards the British government? The first one, because of the political work done by the early nationalists, the democratic ideas began to take root among Indians. Following all the civil rights demanded by the early nationalists, removal of restriction on freedom of speech and freedom of press. Okay, so the removal of restriction on freedom of speech and freedom of press, they just wanted to remove that. And abolition of preventive detention act and restoration of individual rights. They just wanted to abolish or to stop the preventive detention act and restoration of individual rights. Okay, also they just wanted to remove the restrictions on freedom of speech. They just wanted to, they are not allowed to speak, they are not allowed to freedom of press, they are not providing to the people. They just wanted to stop that. Okay, so those are the, and the third one, restoration of right to assemble and to form association. They just wanted to bring restoration to assemble or to unity. The British government or the company were not provided or told them to bring a group, but they wanted that. And the next, methods of the early nationalists. How was the method they just formed? The methods adopted by the early nationalists had two objectives. There were the two objectives for the early nationalists. The first set of method is that their first objective was to educate Indians about modern politics, to arouse national political consciousness, and to create united public opinion. For this they adopted the following methods. The first one, held a meeting, gave speeches, and passed resolutions for popular demands. So they just formed the meetings and passed resolution and popular demands, used press to criticize government policies, and set petitions to government, and they just give the petitions or the cases or the written complaints against the government. Okay, so those are the things they have done. And next we will discuss the second set of method. The first set we have discussed. The second set is that their second objective was to influence British government and public. For this they adopted the following methods. The second method is that too, they just wanted to influence the British government and public. How? So for that what they have done, they used petitions, prayers, and protest. So they just used petitions, prayers, and protest to the against the British government to look into the problems of the Indians. They just wanted to stop the problems of the Indians. They just started the petitions, prayers, and protest. And second, published weekly journals India in London to present India's case before the British public. And also they just bought up a weekly were in London. For what? To produce a case in their place also. Indian leaders like Dadabhai Naoroji traveled to British to make British people and politicians aware about the problems faced by the Indians. Also, Dadabhai Naoroji went to Britain and aware about the problems faced in India, told to the leaders of Britain also. Now we will discuss partition of Bengal. How do the partition of Bengal were held and which year? It was held in 1905. Who were done? It was done by the Viceroy Lord Curzon. The tenure of Lord Curzon from 1899 to 1905, as the Viceroy was full of controversies. The partition of Bengal in 1905 was one of his administrative measures created strong resentment among India. So the partition of Bengal brought a strong resentment or strong anger towards the British government or towards the company from India. So their motto was to partition the Bengal only. In 1905 it was done by Viceroy Lord Curzon. Okay, he done more controversies or more problem, but it created the partition of Bengal created more resentment or anger towards the British government from Indian people or from ordinary people. Okay, it created more problem. The official reason for the partition was that since Bengal was too big, it was important to divide it so that it could be administered efficiently. But the partition of Bengal was widely criticized. All sections of population rose in opposition. Demonstration and a public meeting were held throughout Bengal. Okay, so the partition was deliberate attempt to weaken it, sowing seeds of disunity between Hindus and Muslims. The main motto of the British or the company was to weaken by sowing seeds to disunity between Hindus and Muslims. They just wanted to separate. The company wanted to separate the Hindus and Muslims. Those were that is the main aim of partition of Bengal on 1905. And the causes of partition of Bengal, according to the British rulers, the motive behind the partition was administrative necessity, as the province of Bengal was too big to be efficiently administered by the single provisional government. So their official response for the partition of Bengal was that they were not unable to control, or they were unable to administrate, because the Bengal was too big to administrate for the British government. They officially told to the people like that it is very huge to administrate, or to administrate level. And however, its motive behind position was to something else, which includes Bengal was the nerve curve of the Indian nationalism, and the British thought to stop and weaken the tide of nationalism, the partition of Bengal is necessary. Okay, that is a nerve center, or the topmost center of everything, the Bengal. So they wanted to curb Bengali influence by placing Bengalis under two administration and to reduce them to the minority in Bengal itself. They just bought a curb, they just bring sow a seed by the British government. Like that movement, they just made a partition or division. They bought, they just separated the Bengal. Okay, and they just wanted to create a gulf between Hindus and Muslim. They just wanted to bring a separation in Hindus and Muslim. Their motto was that. Okay, and nationalist representative. What are the nationalist representative they bought? The Indian nationalists opposed the partition of Bengal. Definitely they will oppose. The Indian nationalists opposed the partition of Bengal, and they concluded that the partition was the deliberate attempt to divide the Bengalis on territorial grounds and a religious basis, of weakening the nationalism in Bengal. And they just actually they supported the Indian nationalists opposed the partition of Bengal. Okay, the Indian nationalists were opposed the partition of Bengal, and moreover, the manner in which the announcement of the partition was made without considering public opinion hurt the sentiments of the people of the Bengal. Without any discussion, the British government or the company done the partition of the Bengal in 1905. Now we will discuss the Surat split of 1907. The differences between the early and the assertive nationalists was increasing. Okay, so the difference, or the problems, or what are the difference from the company and from the people, mind of people, it arising. The assertive nationalists wanted to extend the Swadeshi and boycott to the entire nation to attain Swaraj. On the other hand, early nationalists wanted it to be restricted to Bengal only. Okay, so the assertive nationalists wanted to extend the Swadeshi. On the other hand, early nationalists wanted to be restricted to Bengal only. Okay, so Surat split also came to be very problem. Okay, so the Surat split, the early nationalists began control the Congress, and the assertive nationalists decided to function from outside. The two groups were reunited in the Congress session held in Lucknow in 1916. In 1906, at the Calcutta session, early nationalists and assertive nationalists entered their differences and together opposed the partition of Bengal. But the issue of Swadeshi and Swaraj was not yet resolved between these two wings. They just joined together, but they didn't want, or they didn't met or solve the problem of Swadeshi and Swaraj. Okay, and the early nationalists began to control the Congress, and the assertive nationalists decided to function from outside. In 1907, there was a disagreement over the candidate of the next president at the Surat session of the Congress. In 1907, okay, there was a disagreement over the candidate. The early nationalists proposed the same Rashtra Behari Ghosh, and the assertive nationalists proposed the name Lala Rajpat Rai. Okay, so the early nationalists proposed the name Rash Behari Ghosh, and assertive nationalists proposed the name Lala Rajpat Rai. The caused complete confusion at the Surat session in 1907. This led to the split in the Congress. So the caused complete confusion in the Surat session in 1907. That was the split in the Congress. That threat that came to a threat to split in the Congress. The assertive nationalists were expelled from INC for 9 years. They remained out of the Congress. The split was unfortunate as British took advantage of it by adopting a policy of concession and repression. And concession of the early nationalist and repression to be the assertive nationalist. Okay, and policy of concession and repression were held at the time of split of unfortunate, and British took advantage of it by adopting a policy. Okay, split was unfortunate. How? By taking an advantage or by giving a policy by the British government. And next, the main objective of the assertive nationalist is the main was that the attainment of Swaraj, that is complete independence. So the main objective of the assertive nationalist was that to bring the complete independence. Okay, so the methods of the assertive nationalist is that the main focus of them was to stop economic exploitation of India by the British and to get a larger share of Indians to administration. The main aim was that to stop the economic exploitation. The British government's main aim was to exploit the economic structure of India, but to stop that only the methods of administrative nationalism wanted. Okay, the adopt the policy of non-cooperation and passive resistance and mass agitation and self-reliance, etc., were the policies have done by the assertive nationalist. Okay, the policy of non-cooperation, passive resistance, mass agitation, and self-reliance are the policies adopted by the assertive nationalist. Their methods can be grouped into 4 categories: Swadeshi, boycott, national education, and passive resistance. Swadeshi, boycott, national education, and passive boycotts. And next, we will discuss Swadeshi. It means producing necessary things its own country and use it without depending on imported goods. Okay, Swadeshi means producing necessary things in our country. We want to produce our products from our country and use it and without depending on imported goods. And there were occasional bonfires on foreign cloth, salt and sugar, which popularized the Swadeshi idea. Occasional bonfire of foreign cloth and salt and sugar. There were sudden increase of price. Okay, so because of that only they just wanted to produce their products. Okay, and boycott. Swadeshi and boycott are two sides of the same coin. Boycott of British goods and use of Swadeshi was made to encourage Indian industries and to provide employment opportunities to Indians. Actually, Swadeshi and boycott are the two sides of the same coin. Okay, how we can say? Because it encouraged the Indian industries to provide employment opportunities to the Indians. Okay, boycotting of British products and bringing our products, there will be definitely the thing will be there. It also proved as the most effective weapon for harming British interests in India. Also, it proved what the most effective weapon will be harming the British government if we boycott the foreign products. And the national education, how they brought up the national education at that time when the British government threatened to take action against those students who were helping the assertive nationalists. The national leaders decided to establish national universities free from government control. Okay, the assertive nationalists brought up the education field from what? They just wanted to bring education field free from the government, free from the British government, free from the company. Okay, many educational institutions were started during this period, like Bengal National College in Bengal and Pachaipa National College in Chennai, DAV College in Punjab, etc. were the schools or the educational sectors free from the government or free from the British or free from the company. Okay, and the efforts were also made to provide education in vernacular languages. Okay, written books and all the things were also provided to the students to study well. And the passive resistance. What is passive resistance? To achieve their aim, the assertive nationalists adopted the policy of non-violent resistance. They just don't want to make a violent. So their aim, to achieve their aim, they made a silent. They asked the people not to cooperate with the government and boycott the government services, schools, colleges, and courts, etc. They just told to people to cooperate with the government and boycott the government services. They advocated courage, self-confidence, and the spirit of sacrifice to attain Swaraj. They they encourage, or they involve what courage, self-confidence, and the spirit of sacrifice. Besides these, the other methods used by them were as follows: the revivalism. They just used, they revived self-respect by referring to India's past glory. Okay, they uh, introduce, or they just themselves self-respected how by listening or hearing the past glory, India's past glory, referring the past glory. These leaders planned the national movement of people's religious beliefs. Tilak revived Shivaji festival in 1895. Okay, Tilak revived Shivaji festival in 1895. Chandragupta Vikramaditya Rana Pratap and Shivaji Maharaja were presented as national heroes to inspire the masses to fight for their country. Okay, and those were the main revivalism in the passive resistance. Okay. And the second one is personal sacrifices. The followers were ready to self-sacrifice, suffering and hardship to achieve their aim. The followers or the members, the leaders were self-sacrifice. They've done sufferings and hardship and to achieve their aim. They wanted to get the freedom from the British government. They wanted to get British back to their country. And the third one is mass involvement. The assertive nationalists had faith in the strength of the masses also, and they aroused the masses by influencing them with their sacrifice and suffering. Okay, so that's only for our chapter. I hope you have understood the topic, India's freedom struggle, the first phase. If you have any doubt, you can come and